Now let's turn our attention to observations as an important source of primary data. Let's have a look at some observational techniques and talk about these. First of all, as I just said, observational techniques are used as a means of generating primary data. The data that's observed is primary. It comes from the source directly. The observer records the events to give a true and accurate account of the phenomenon being observed. So the observer must be honest and record and report exactly what happened and not influence what happened. Now, they give a wide opportunity to collect data on a range of behaviours and interactions. These may look at group behaviour, they may look at individuals, they may look at teams and committees, they may look at all sorts of areas that other techniques would find perhaps difficult to consider. So what are the advantages of observations? Well, first of all, they provide direct information about the behaviour of individuals or groups. It's direct, so it's primary. It comes directly from the source, and that's important. It permits the observer to understand the context of the observation. You see, the observer is not just looking at the group, but the observer may be looking at the environment in which the group operates, or the context in which it operates. So the observer is able to pick up more data. It's richer than just, let's say, a questionnaire or a set of interviews. Here, all of the issues that impinge upon the group may be recorded, may be observed. It's very good for identifying unanticipated outcomes and in unstructured and flexible settings. Generally speaking, the world of business in particular may have considerable amounts of unstructure or non-structure. The world of business, things happen, events happen, the world changes, and groups and individuals, managers and workers and so on, they respond to the change in various ways. And it's not very structured. So this approach, the approach of making observations, enables data to be fed back, which is useful because it picks up all of the events. So it gives a much more holistic picture of the observed events, much more a fuller picture of the events. The context in which the events are taking place can be more easily understood as well. Observing the group, let's say it's a group in a company or a work group, let's say, observing the group is fine, but observing the environment and the pressures on the group and the context in which they're working, all of those may contribute towards the functioning of the group itself. And other techniques may not pick those up. So observations are a very valuable source of information. Indeed, sometimes the observer may have a greater understanding of the full picture as compared to members of the group that's been observed. The group may be focused on solving a problem within the business. A work group may be working on a particular problem. But the observer can see the full context, can see the issues, perhaps the wider issues and the constraints that the group are working under. And perhaps the group themselves are not entirely familiar or aware of those constraints. So sometimes the observer may have more information than the observed. Of course there are disadvantages. For a start, this approach, observations, it's time consuming. The observer must be there. So time and expense are involved. They must be there, and they must be there for however long it takes to collect the information. And of course the observer's presence may influence the participants, may influence the observed. The observer may influence the observed. The people being observed may amend their behavior because there's an observer watching them. So the information coming back may be biased as a consequence. Now the observer must be aware of this and must minimize his or her impact on the group. They must try to find a way of collecting the information that's not intrusive and not influential in any way. It does not influence the group, so that the information coming back is true. It's the true picture. Selective perception of the observer may distort the data. The observer must be objective, must tell it as it is, must report exactly what's seen, nothing more, nothing less. Selective perception means that they are trying to explain what is happening through their own interpretation, but their interpretation may be based on events in their life which may not be relevant here, and this may lead to a significant distortion of the truth, a significant distortion of the facts. So it's important that the observer remains objective and also detached from what's being observed, not involved, just standing back and observing and reporting what is being observed. The observer has little control over the situation, and that is important. It's important that the person doing the observations does not control the situation and does not influence the outcomes. If the truth is to be reported, then the group, and let's say it's a group observation in a company, then the group must find the solution and report the solution. That is the true course of events. If the observer gets involved and makes recommendations, then the observer is no longer the observer. The observer is a part of the group, and the outcome has been biased and influenced by that intervention. So it's important that the observer stays outside of the group. Now, it's also important to remember that whatever is being observed may be atypical. It may not be normal. It may be that the group has been observed on a bad day, or the group has been observed when there are situations in the environment that are not normal, that something is happening in the environment which is influencing the outcome that would not otherwise have been the case. So it's important that the observer reports anything which is not usual, and that some investigation into what is the normal setting for this activity, whatever is normal, is reported, so that if there were changes in the work environment on the day on which the observation took place, those changes could be reported as well. The whole idea is to find what the group would do in a natural sense, on a day-to-day sense. On a day-to-day basis, what would the group do to solve this problem, and perhaps report back on that. So the types of information for which observations are a good source. Well, the background and setting of the research. Certainly the observations can give a rich account of the background and the settings, the environmental factors that influence the group, if it is a group observation. The physical environment in which the project takes place, that's important. There may be issues with the physical environment which distort the outcome, or there may be issues on the particular day with the physical environment. So these need to be reported. The human, the social environment, the ways in which all participants interact and behave towards each other. Now that can be picked up through observations in a very detailed form. It's possible for the observer to see who in the group are influencing other members of the group, and if there's a leadership issue, and the sources of power within the group, and the strengths, the weaknesses of the group. The whole dynamics of the group can be looked at and reported back. So these are typical situations where observations are a good source. Now the types of information for which observations are a good source. Well, observation techniques give insight into the full life and context of the project, including the environment and resources of the project. So observations are good at reporting on the full picture, as I keep saying. Also looking at the roles and activities of the observed. As I said earlier, leadership issues, who's got power within the group, who's got most influence. So these issues can be observed and reported back. The organizational culture, unique process and language can be better understood using this technique. It's very difficult to ask questions about an organizational culture because it's so rich and it's so textured. It's very difficult to get a handle on an organizational culture. But by observations, all of the nuances of the culture could be perhaps observed and accounted for. But simply to go into an organization and say that this culture is very macho and it's very profit orientated and there is little regard to the workers, perhaps that is very superficial. Whereas observations based over a period of time would perhaps give a completely different picture. So it's important that in assessing areas like business culture or the processes that a business undertakes, even the specialist language that the business develops, the language related to the product and the processes it uses, those can be better understood if they're observed. Now the types of information for which observations are a good source, the non-verbal communications. Non-verbal communication may be picked up from observations of the way the participants dress, the expressions used, the way they discuss issues, the way they deal with their physical environment. These are all non-verbal forms of communication. It's important that the observer is trained to understand these and to understand the importance of these issues, because this is some of the context, the background to the observation, and it's very important. We also have an issue of what's known as notable non-occurrences. This technique enables the observer to determine whether there are resources or people missing from the setting and why. So the observer, in looking at a group within a business, the functioning of a certain group within the business, may be told or observed that some people are missing. They may be missing because of illness, or they may be missing because the management didn't want them involved in that activity, or the management didn't want them to be observed. So there are various reasons, but it's important to pick up on non-occurrences. Now, recording observations. Well, the observation technique records events, identifies resources required, and provides a wide context for the research. That's what is aimed at in this approach. The observation technique records the events, it identifies the resources required, and provides a wider context for the research. The method, known as the protocol, should prompt the observer to describe the setting where the observation took place and what the physical setting was like. So the method of the observation, known as the protocol, should prompt the observer to describe the setting where the observation took place, and also to set out the physical setting. So where did it take place? What was the physical setting? What was the environment like? The protocol should also identify the people and their characteristics. Who was involved in the observation and what were their characteristics? And then describe the event. The protocol should describe the event and what happened, whatever was being observed. Then it should document the interactions between the characters and describe and assess the quality of the observed event. What was the quality of the event? Was it straightforward? Was it interrupted? Was somebody trying to influence it? What issues could affect the quality of the observation? In other words, what are the criticisms of the report? From the observer's perspective, what issues occurred that may detract from the quality of the exercise itself? But the protocol should also observe any unanticipated events and make a note of those unanticipated events. Now, recording observations. Well, note forms and field notes may be used to provide more detail and also as a way of helping memory later. So it's important for the observer to make notes throughout the exercise, just to act as a memory guide later on. Care is to be taken here, however. The fact that someone's making observations and also making notes may influence the behavior of those being observed. They may be frightened off by somebody sitting around with a notebook making notes on what they're saying or what they're doing. So it may influence behavior, so care has to be taken with this one. However, the field notes should contain background information and should record this in a factual, accurate and thorough manner. It shouldn't contain trivial observations or produce recommendations. It's all based on fact, and it should really just focus in on the main issues. Nothing trivial. It should make a note of the date and the time of the observation, and also the place where the observation took place. Now that concludes our talk about observations. This is a very important approach to collecting primary data, and one widely used. Journalists use it all the time, just about, and many organizations use this as a valuable insight into the workings of groups within businesses, or the operations of certain processes, making observations regarding efficiency, production. So there are many areas in which observations are used. It's a very important topic, and the issues we've discussed here just set out the framework and some of the major issues involved in making observations. But that's all I want to say on this topic, so thank you for watching.